What are you most afraid of?
Unknown future.
The unknown future?
Yes.
What do you think is going to happen?
We don't know exactly, but we're expecting the worst.
Laura Logan on CBS 60 Minutes speaking with Father Joseph Ibrahim, just one of many of Iraq's Christians persecuted by ISIS, fleeing that nation. Staying with us now, we're so pleased on the anchor desk, is Miranda Khan and our guest, Father Eamon Kelly. Also from Newsmax Washington, we've got our friend Ford O'Connell, and via Skype, terrorism expert Raymond Ibrahim is here. Raymond, again, we thank you for your time. We heard Father Joseph Ibrahim. You have joined us before. In just the short period of time since we last spoke to you, are things getting worse in Iraq?
They're getting absolutely worse by the day, and this is to be expected because not much is being done except words. The ISIS videos that we're seeing, that people that brought all this to our attention, has actually been going on for a very long time, since Saddam Hussein was ousted. I recall back as far as 2006, hearing about little children being crucified and decapitated, Christian children, and testimonies in Canada and so forth to frighten people. And it's continuing to get worse. The bottom line is, if nothing is done, then what he said is absolutely true, that you should continue to fear the future, and extinction is definitely a possibility.
Raymond, Christians are being persecuted not just in Iraq, they're being persecuted all over the Middle East. What's going to happen for this to cease? I mean, this can't continue, or there's going to be no Christians left in the Middle East except in Israel.
Well, that's true, and that's why it's been going on. That's why in 1900 Christians were approximately 20% of the Middle East, and today they're reportedly 2%. So yes, what has to happen is actually Islamic ideology has to change, which I don't foresee happening, because what we're discussing, this sort of persecution and subjugation, is grounded in certain core texts of Islam, or Western powers can intervene in some fashion, and we have a precedent for that in the colonial era. Western powers intervened in the Ottoman Empire, and they abolished things like the jizya tax, which was tribute demanded, or extortion money from Christians and so forth. But so far, neither of those two look like they're going to happen.
Father Kelly, hearing what you're hearing now, he's talking about extinction. How concerned are you when you hear that word?
We saw the church was flourishing in North Africa in the first centuries of the expansion of Christianity, and then it became very small for centuries. So we saw Albania during the communist period, the intense suffering in other countries for Christianity. So these possibilities are real. And what happens in a family when one child goes out of control, or an adult that's close to the family, or in a school playground when there's a bully? There's usually enough people in the family and the community to come in and stop. So I'm not the politician, I'm not the expert on these aspects. There are people who are much more qualified. So I think we need to pray for our leaders. It's a very hard work to govern. It's a very hard decision to call many times in a family, which school to put a child in. So here we're at a very, very dramatic point in history of the Middle East, where the world community should be very concerned when you see actions of such incredible horror and violence.
Should we intervene more, though?
You're asking me then the political question. So there should be an intervention, but how should the intervention be carried? It takes a lot of pondering, because sometimes an intervention is considered, and for example, there was an intent to intervene seriously in Syria a year and a half ago, and Pope Francis called for a World Day of Prayer, and that intervention was altered. So we have many different aspects to bring to bear here, and I think that the great political community, the great leadership, there are great peoples in the world that should be able to seriously help people who are a little bit out of their mind the way they're behaving, or a lot out of their mind, to fix this situation.
And we will continue to monitor that. Father Eamon Kelly, you have our thanks, and to our friend Raymond Ibrahim, we thank you as well. There's more ahead. With Miranda Kahn and Father Eamon Kelly here on the anchor desk, with Ford O'Connell in Washington, D.C., and terrorism expert Raymond Ibrahim joining us via Skype, let us continue our conversation about Christian persecution. Father Kelly, you were telling us a very different situation exists in Israel and in Jerusalem, where you're located, than what we're seeing in places like Iraq right now.
Yes, it's completely viable. There's a big separation from in conditions on the ground, and we have thousands of people coming, and 1 million people visit Bethlehem in Palestine, in the West Bank, every year to visit the sites of Jesus' birth, and nothing happens. All the people want the visitors to come. This is a treasure for humanity, the vestiges that are left of the time 2,000 years ago.
And of course, we celebrate the Prince of Peace and his resurrection on Easter Sunday, and yet the strife, the earthly strife, continues. And that's why I want to bring Raymond Ibrahim back in to talk about the sad reality that we see in Iraq and elsewhere. Raymond, you were saying the situation is getting worse, that something must be done. Do you expect the world's Christian community to answer the call?
You know, a lot of Christians, individual Christians, Christian communities are, of course, concerned and would like to answer the call, but it's hard to get the politicians on board to be the ones answering the call, because they're the ones who are needed. So it's at this point, you know, you hear it oftentimes, and when you listen to interviews of these indigenous Middle Eastern Christians in Iraq and so forth, where they just don't understand where's the response. You know, they always say things like, we always hear about human rights and the concern for this and that and concern for endangered species, and basically they are an endangered species and no one's doing anything. We have all these antiquities, ancient artifacts, ancient churches, ancient manuscripts being burned and destroyed and bombed, and the world is just silent. So it's I don't know what it's going to take to make people react to this, but they also make another more prophetic and dire statement when they say that what's happening to us will come to you. And we're already seeing the same sort of religious hostility reaching Western shores, especially in Europe, where you have large Muslim populations and so forth. So it's just a ticking time game right now.
Father Kelly, one U.S. Army that has actually gone back and returned to help people in Iraq defend themselves against ISIS. Do you think we'll see more of this? And would you encourage that? I know you don't really want to touch on politics.
Yes, I don't feel competent to assess the implications of private citizens doing actions when the whole human family should gather. I can understand the frustration of individuals who know the suffering and see the inaction and try to take it into their own hands.
And speaking of that, let's get Raymond in his perspective on this. Will we see more American vets go try to help defend Christians against ISIS, Raymond?
It's a good bet. I know people who keep talking about it and they don't even know what I do. And my point is, people are actually mentioning this, and some people, as we've noted earlier, are actually traveling there and fighting on behalf of fellow Christians because they can't stand for this injustice, and they cite and they point out that they can't rely on their government to actually do something. And many of them don't even want to give their names because they're fearful from the U.S. government, even though they're doing the right thing and so forth. So it's kind of a strange situation right now where, you know, a lot of the people.
Raymond, we got 30 seconds left. Is the lack of outrage by the Western powers, and the U.S. in particular, over this situation a fact that Christianity is declining among Western countries? In all honesty, if we have more Christians, there might be more outrage.
Well, I absolutely agree with that. That's a fair enough statement.
And on that note of unanimity for a challenge that is facing this world, Father Eamon Kelly, we appreciate you coming in from the Holy Land, from Notre Dame in Jerusalem, to talk about the situation there with Easter coming up, and also with Ford O'Connell. We appreciate his input, and Raymond Ibrahim Skyping in as we take a look at the Christian calendar with Easter approaching. A very timely discussion, and a very, very challenging situation confronting us with the bitter realities of those being persecuted for their faith. More with Ford O'Connell when we come back next on America's Forum.